There's a moment, and if you've lived it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where something inside you just stops. Not breaks, not gives up, stops. Like a machine that's been running on the wrong fuel for 30 years, finally shutting down. And in that silence, in that strange, uncomfortable stillness, the people around you start to get nervous. They say things like, "You've changed," or "I don't recognize you anymore," or, and this one's the most telling, "Is everything okay?" You seem different, and you look at them, and you almost want to laugh. Because yes, everything is okay. For the first time in your life, everything is actually okay. But you can't explain that to them. Because what just happened inside you has no good language yet. What they're sensing, what's making them uneasy, is that they've just lost their access to you. And they don't understand why the door that was always open is now simply not there anymore. This is where the empath becomes something the world has no real defense against. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how that happens, and more importantly, why most empaths never get there. If you've ever felt like your sensitivity was a curse, like feeling everything deeply was slowly destroying you, subscribe right now, because what I'm about to walk you through will change how you see yourself permanently. Hit subscribe and stay with me. Carl Jung spent decades studying people like you, not motivational speakers, not wellness influencers, a psychiatrist, a man who spent his life in rooms with people at their most broken. And what he found when he studied empaths who had passed through every layer of suffering completely rearranged his understanding of human psychology. He didn't use the word unstoppable casually. Jung wasn't built for casual. But there was a specific group of people he kept encountering in his clinical work. People who had been through everything. Complete self-abandonment. Cycles of giving until there was nothing left. Relationships that consumed them whole. And then somehow, on the other side of all of it, they emerged as something he struggled to categorize. They hadn't just healed. Healing is what you do when you recover from an injury and go back to normal. These people weren't going back to anything. They had become something categorically different from who they were before. And the combination Jung observed in them, total sensitivity with total stability, he came to recognize as the psychological endgame of every empath's journey. The final stage, most empaths never reach it. And today, you're going to find out exactly why, and exactly what it takes to get there. To understand the final stage, you need to understand the full map. Because this transformation doesn't just appear one day. It's built on top of everything that came before it. Every painful layer, every failed attempt, every relapse into old patterns. Jung mapped the empath's progression with clinical precision, and it looks, from the outside, like a slow-motion disaster. Stage 1 is unconscious absorption. You don't even know it's happening. You just think you're too sensitive. You think life is overwhelming. You carry weight that isn't yours, and you blame yourself for being crushed under it. You assume something is fundamentally wrong with you. Stage 2 is the awakening. This is where most of you watching right now are sitting. You've found the language. Empath, narcissist, people-pleasing, self-abandonment. You can name the pattern now. You can see it happening in real time. The problem is, you still can't fully stop it. Naming the trap doesn't automatically get you out of it. Stage 3 is where it gets interesting. You start setting limits. You start saying no. You start pulling back. But here's what Jung noticed, that most people teaching this subject completely miss. The limits set in stage 3 are built from fear, not from authority. You're not drawing a line because you're sovereign. You're drawing a line because you're exhausted and terrified. And people feel that difference in their bones. A wall built from fear invites testing. A boundary set from genuine inner authority invites respect. They feel completely different on the receiving end. Here's a question worth sitting with. When you set limits with people in your life, honestly, are you doing it from a place of power or from a place of exhaustion? Because those two things can look identical on the surface and produce completely opposite results over time. Think about that. Most empaths cycle between stages 2 and 3, 4 years, sometimes decades. They understand the dynamic. They try to protect themselves. They get pulled back in. They understand again, set limits again, get pulled back. It becomes a loop that feels like growth, because the vocabulary keeps improving, but the cycle never actually ends. Jung identified exactly what keeps empaths locked in that loop, and it wasn't what most people expect. It wasn't a lack of knowledge. It wasn't insufficient healing. It wasn't the wrong therapist or the wrong books or the wrong framework. It was identity. Here's the thing nobody wants to hear, and I'm going to say it anyway because it's the most important thing in this entire video. Most empaths, even the ones who have done years of deep, serious inner work, are still organized around their wounds. The wound is still the center of gravity. Everything orbits it. Their identity is the sensitive one, the healer, the one who understands, the one who's been hurt and is bravely recovering. Even the healing journey itself becomes an extension of the wound. They're not just an empath. They're the empath who's learning boundaries, the empath recovering from narcissistic abuse, the empath on a spiritual path. The wound moved from the background to the foreground. It got better lighting and a more sympathetic narrative, but it's still running the show. I want you to stop for 1 second and be honest with yourself. If I asked you to describe who you are, not what you do, not your history, just who you are, would the word empath or sensitive or healing be in the first sentence? If yes, comment the word wound below. Not as judgment, as recognition. Because you can't release something you won't first acknowledge. And here's the brutal truth Jung arrived at. You cannot transcend something you're still organized around. You can grow around it. You can build coping strategies over it. You can develop extraordinary awareness about it. But you cannot move past the center of your own gravity without something far more radical than healing. What Jung called it was ego death, followed by reconstruction from the self, capital S, rather than from the wound. The wound identity has to completely die. Not heal, not evolve, die. And I mean that literally, not metaphorically. Jung watched this happen in his patients and described it as the most terrifying and liberating thing a human being can undergo. Because when your identity dies, even the identity built around your own healing, there is a period where you are genuinely nothing. The old self is gone. The new self hasn't formed yet. You are standing in a void with no role, no story, no community built around your pain, no purpose organized around your survival. And that void is exactly where most empaths turn back. They feel the emptiness and they panic. They reach for the old identity because at least it was familiar. At least being the wounded empath gave them something to be. Being nothing gives them nothing. So they retreat, back to the healing loop, back to the limits that never quite hold, back to the identity that makes sense of everything that happened to them. And they never reach the final stage, because reaching it requires tolerating the void long enough for something entirely new to emerge from it. If this is landing, if you can feel the truth of this in your body right now, subscribe. The people who are serious about this transformation, not just curious about it, they subscribe. Because this is the kind of work that requires consistency. Hit subscribe and let's keep going. What emerges from that void, what Jung called the self with a capital S, operates on a completely different architecture than the wound-organized identity that preceded it. Instead of sensitivity as vulnerability, sensitivity becomes a precision instrument. Instead of empathy as burden, empathy becomes a form of intelligence. Instead of feeling everything as suffering, feeling everything becomes a strategic advantage that almost no one else on earth possesses. The empath who passes through ego death and allows the self to reorganize their consciousness walks into a room and reads it instantly. But the reading no longer costs them anything. They sit with someone and see through every performance straight to the machinery underneath. But they don't get hooked by what they see. They sense shifts in emotional atmosphere before anyone else registers them. But those shifts don't pull them off their center. All the empathic abilities are still fully active, sharper than ever, actually, because they're no longer distorted by the empath's own unprocessed pain. When you're drowning in your wounds, your perception is clouded by your projections. You see your trauma reflected everywhere you look. When the wound identity has died and the self is running the show, perception becomes clean. You start seeing what's actually there. And here's what makes this stage genuinely unstoppable. The empath who has arrived here perceives everything and is moved by nothing that doesn't warrant their movement. They feel someone's manipulation and it registers as data. not as emotional hook. They sense someone's anger and they recognize it without absorbing it. They detect someone's neediness and they can choose compassion without being pulled into rescue. The word choose is everything here. The automatic reactive patterns that used to run them are gone. Not managed, not suppressed. Gone, because those patterns were products of the wound identity, and the wound identity no longer exists. There is nothing left for manipulation to hook into. No abandonment wound to trigger. No approval hunger to exploit. No guilt mechanism to activate. The entire infrastructure that once made them controllable has been dismantled. Not through willpower, but through the death of the self that contained it. Here's the debate I want to leave in the comments. Is emotional invulnerability the same thing as emotional unavailability? A lot of people would say yes, that if nothing can get to you, you've simply shut down. But Jung would say those are opposite states. Where do you fall on that? Think about it, because your answer will tell you exactly where you are in your own transformation. Jung documented 5 specific qualities that emerged in empaths who reached this final stage. They operated like an integrated system, not isolated traits, but a unified way of moving through the world. Perceptive authority, they stopped second-guessing what they saw. In earlier stages, an empath might sense dishonesty and immediately doubt themselves. Maybe I'm projecting, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm being unfair. That self-doubt evaporated completely. When they perceived something, they trusted it, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty of someone whose perception had been tested thousands of times and proven accurate. This made them impossible to gaslight. You cannot make someone doubt what they see when they've learned through years of painful experience that their seeing is reliable. Selective engagement, they stopped giving their attention to everything indiscriminately. Like an experienced musician who can hear every instrument in the orchestra but choose to follow one line. The final stage empath could perceive every emotional current in a room while consciously directing their attention toward what actually warranted it. This meant they stopped hemorrhaging energy. They stopped getting drained. Not because they stopped feeling, but because they stopped letting every feeling come into their full resources. Integrated ferocity. This is the one that surprises people. Earlier stage empaths are usually gentle because they're afraid of their own anger. They've been told that anger is incompatible with compassion, that being a good empath means being endlessly accommodating. So they suppress the rage. They turn it inward where it becomes depression and self-destruction. But the empath who has passed through ego death has claimed their shadow, which means they've claimed their anger as rightfully theirs. Not wounded anger, not reactive anger. Clean, purposeful ferocity that arises in direct proportion to what the situation actually requires. They can cut through someone's performance with a single sentence so precisely aimed that it leaves no room for deflection. Not cruel, not aggressive, just so accurate it's undeniable. They hadn't become mean, they'd become whole. And whole includes the capacity to be fierce. Emotional sovereignty, and this is different from emotional regulation, which implies you're managing something that's always trying to destabilize you. Sovereignty means your emotional state originates from within you rather than being determined by whatever's happening around you. The final stage empath doesn't walk into a sad room and become sad. They walk in, perceive the sadness completely, and remain in whatever state they arrived in. They can choose to empathize. They can choose to share in the feeling. But it's a choice, not a compulsion. Their emotional life belongs to them. Purposeful compassion, and this last one is what makes everything sustainable. Earlier stage empaths practice indiscriminate compassion. They feel compelled to help everyone because they cannot tolerate witnessing pain, not out of pure virtue, but because unhealed pain resonates with the pain they're still carrying. The final stage empath has compassion that is vast and simultaneously precise. They can witness suffering without being compelled to intervene. They can choose to act, and when they do, their action is effective and bounded. They help in ways that actually help rather than in ways that make themselves feel better about someone else's situation. They're not spending their compassion, they're investing it. Of those 5 qualities, perceptive authority, selective engagement, integrated ferocity, emotional sovereignty, purposeful compassion, which one feels furthest away from where you are right now? comment the name below, because the one that stings the most is almost always the one you need to look at first. Jung noted something quietly devastating about the empaths who reached this stage. After the transformation, after they'd arrived, they went through a period of grief. Not grief for the old self exactly, grief for the time. For all the years spent suffering what didn't have to be permanent. They'd look back at the relationships they stayed in far too long, the jobs they endured out of misplaced responsibility, the thousands of times they betrayed their own perception because someone else told them they were wrong about what they were seeing, and they'd mourn it. But Jung also observed that this grief was brief, incomparably brief, compared to what came before. Because the empath who has completed this transformation has a relationship with pain that is fundamentally different now. Pain arrives, they feel it fully, and then it moves through them and is gone. It doesn't take up residence. It doesn't define the week or the month or the decade. It passes through like weather, fully experienced and fully released. That capacity to feel without being captured by feeling is perhaps the single most powerful outcome of this entire journey. If you're somewhere in the earlier stages right now, if you're in that loop of understanding and trying and getting pulled back in, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not stuck because you haven't learned enough. You are not stuck because you haven't done enough work. You are stuck because you are still organized around your wound. And that wound identity, as true as it feels, as familiar as it is, as much as it has given you community and purpose and a story that makes sense of what happened, it is not you. It is a structure built by circumstances, and structures can be released. Not easily, not quickly, not without passing through a void that will genuinely terrify you. But on the other side of that void is a version of you that doesn't need protection because nothing gets in that you don't allow. A version that perceives the full spectrum of human experience with complete clarity and responds with precise, chosen, sovereign action. A version that is, finally, nobody's emotional territory. What happened to you was real. The pain was real. But organizing your entire life around it is a choice. And it's a choice you can stop making. When you stop, when you let it go completely, not mostly, not 90%. Completely what remains is something that has no wound to nurse, no story to defend, and no ceiling on what it can hold. That's what Jung meant by unstoppable. Not someone who can't be hurt. Someone who can be hurt and remain themselves through the hurting. Not someone who feels nothing. Someone who feels everything and loses nothing of themselves in the feeling. That's the final stage, and it is waiting for you. If this video reached something in you, if some part of you recognized itself in what we walked through today, subscribe, not for me, for the version of you that's on the other side of this. The people who are building toward that version. They subscribe, they stay, they do the work. Are you one of them? Every shadow claimed, every wound composted into wisdom, every ounce of sensitivity converted from liability into the most precise instrument you've ever possessed. That's who you actually are. You just haven't let the old version finish dying yet.